Good morning and welcome back to the show. I'm Jerry. Today we have four guests Eric, Mao, Charlie, and Maggie in the studio talking about the security dilemma in the Asian Pacific area. Right now, at this moment, US President Joe Biden's visit to South Korea and Japan have gained a lot of attention. Coincidentally, China is holding a military exercise in the disputed South China Sea. China's claim of the South China Sea virtually in its entirety and a crucial waterway has become a potential flashpoint for conflict in Asia. So, the US has increased its power in the Asia-Pacific area since Obama's Asia-Pacific Rebellions action, and the policy was for sure focused not only on trade and investment but also military components. However, this kind of movement has given China an adequate reason to build up its military as well. And back and forth, the US military also expand their capabilities in Guam and San Diego, as well as the forward deployed forces. Besides, Washington has been discussing the possibility of having an air-sea battle with China and has turned more of its naval and air forces to the area. And other strategies are like keep maintaining security cooperation with its allies in Asia Pacific and new partners such as Vietnam. US official has ongoingly showed its concerns through Congress and Security Report insisted the Destabilization Act from China government. And today we are going to focus on four countries: Australia, Singapore, Vietnam, and Japan. So, the security dilemma is a concept that international relations when a country or region raises its security and military strength, it will cause other nations to worry about its purpose. So they will also put more effort on its national defense and increase military power. This kind of action usually leads to tension and conflict that affect various aspects, including economy and politics. So, let's start with Australia. The country just led a federal election last week, and according to The Guardian, China is planning to reset its relationship with Australia. Eric, would you like to share your opinion toward it?
Yes, I would like to. So, according to Wiki, the relations between two countries began to deteriorate in 2018, due to growing concerns of Chinese political influence in various sectors of Australian society. That explains why China wants to reset its relationship with Australia. I find it interesting that according to internet sources, that Australia actually was aware of China's influence as early as 1996, but Australia only started taking China as a serious threat around 2 decades later. Australia pretty much has the same relationship with China as they had for the past 3 to 4 years, which is not on good terms. No, the worst conflict between them was only the ban on the importation of Australian coal by China 3 years ago. They'll still cooperate if the outcome benefits both sides, but still, they'll take jabs at each other if given a chance. However, this passive-aggressive relationship might take a turn after Australia's federal election, as some news outlets said that China is manipulating Australia's election, and as you, the host, said that China is seeking to reset its relation with Australia. To be honest, I don't know much about Australia as a nation, All the information I have is from news outlets, but I think changes will not happen quickly because for the past years, Australia has been on the US side. It'll definitely take more than, say, a few years to undo all of the influence that the US has on Australia. There are like 238 US military bases, according to Wiki, in Australia. I just don't see those bases disappear overnight. On the other hand, if the party that sided with China were to succeed in their endeavors, lowering the intensity of conflicts between Australia and China is of course a good thing, because avoiding conflicts between two world powers is always a safe option. But in turn, the pressure on China may diminish, which is another problem for Asia Pacific region to deal with.
And do you think that PLA, People's Liberation Army, would pose a threat to Australia?
Oh, sorry, my roommate is having a nose problem. All right, so honestly, this opinion of mine might be controversial. That is, Australia is too far away from China to care about PLA from a priority standpoint, at least. What I mean is that if a war were to break out in East Asia, the chances to be the first one to be attacked is pretty low, especially by China. They'll have plenty of time to react. At one point, Australia did see PLA as a real threat, let's say around 2009 to 2013 might be a peak of this kind of worry. And and now Australia is still steadily increasing its military power. It is said that the number of ADF, Australia Defence Force, will increase around will increase by I think 30% in 2040. But when comparing the 2016 defense white paper to that of 2009, it doesn't feel to me to be as urgent. So, in short, I believe Australia sees PLA as a potential threat, but not the biggest one for them.
Eric, thanks for sharing it. So, unlike Australia that has a huge land, Singapore doesn't have a huge territory and abundant resources, and has to carefully navigate diplomatically due to its geolocation. Mao, what's your analysis on Singapore's strategy?
That's a very good question. Since Singapore's independence, the state was always scared of being involved in conflict or its security being threatened. Its independence was not one of self-determination, rather it was expelled from Malaysia in 1965, during the time when the Malay archipelago was a boiling pot of conflict. The high ethnic tension between Chinese and other ethnic groups sprout from China's support of communist insurgency across Southeast Asia, the Philippine-Malay dispute over Sabah, Malayan Communist Party's armed insurgency being active in border regions between Malaysia and Thailand. The Indonesian government will suffer a coup d'etat later that year and violence against alleged communists will erupt. And Malaysia was engaged in border conflicts with Indonesia. For the new republic, the future looks dreadful. Compared to its neighboring state, Singapore does not have much manpower, and the country's limited territory give it no natural resources to rely on. And thus, the state feel their only way to survive is through balancing in diplomacy. This reflects in Singapore's diplomatic trend to focus on supporting stability in the South Sea region, as well as acting as a neutral participant. Singapore also does not have any territorial dispute with its neighbors, which help its neutral stances. Economically, they have signed trade deals with many states in the Pacific region, including its major trade partner, the United States, who signed a treaty of bilateral free trade with Singapore back in 2003. Another of its major trade partners is China, and while there were no formal treaty regarding this field, the two share territorial interests in the South Sea area. They even did a joint military exercise in the region in February of 2021.
Interesting. But having a rising power like China on your doorstep sounds scary, right? So how does Singapore react to this?
Obviously, it's dreading. Like many states in the Asia-Pacific region, Singapore is also aware of China's rising influence. So, military-wise, Singapore remains closely tied to the United States, viewing US support as an important counterweight to Chinese influence, and their involvement in the South Sea area as a determining reason for the region's stability. Singapore became a mutual security partner of the US back in 2005, allowing them to partake in joint exercises, cooperate on various activities such as counterterrorism operations, and allowing US troops to station in the country. The deal was reaffirmed in September of 2019, prolonging the expiration date of the agreement to 2035. Though, in a speech said in April 2022, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong of Singapore did emphasize this relationship is between the Singapore and the US only, and Singapore will not be involved in the war of the United States or ask the United States to come to the rescue when something happens to Singapore. Meanwhile, Singapore upheld the doctrine of balance diplomatically, and while diplomatic incidents occurred, such as in 2016 when China's state media spoke out against Singapore's alleged support of South Sea arbitration, which the Chinese government viewed as infringing their sovereignty in the South Sea region, the relationship between Singapore and other states seems more or less stabilized. An example of Singapore's neutrality being recognized will be how the city-state was chosen to be the location of the 2018 North Korea-US summit, as well as various meetings between representatives of the Republic of China and People's Republic of China. Overall, it seems Singapore's way of sifting the security dilemma brought on by China's rise is to continue its diplomatic goal of balancing between both sides to ensure its survival. Its reliance on the United States military, however, seems to be wavering. Whether that will result in changes in the future remains to be seen.
Thank you for sharing about Singapore. So we know that both Singapore and Vietnam are part of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, but the two countries' diplomatic techniques are quite different. So Charlie, can you tell us about Vietnam's view and the relations between it and China?
Thank you, Jerry. Okay, about the relationship between Vietnam and China, well, although they are both socialist states, their relationship is tense and unstable. Although China stood for the Communist Party during the Vietnam War, China still had disputes with Vietnam after the Communist Party overthrew South Vietnam. For example, Vietnam was tending to Soviet Union's side during the Sino-Soviet split, which was the breaking of political relations between the People's Republic of China and the Soviet Union. Their disagreement on politics ultimately stirred up a war in 1979, which is called the Sino-Vietnamese War. The war had worsened their relationship and served as a base of their conflicts for the upcoming years. Faced with the rise of China and the worsening disputes over the Spratly and Paracel Islands, Vietnam had decided to enhance its military capabilities by increasing the defense spending. And of course, most of the weapons are acquired from Russia, including 6 kilo class submarines. Vietnam also strengthened military ties with other regional states. For example, Vietnam signed defense collaboration partnership with 15 countries in the second half of only 20, the second half of 2010 alone. In addition, they reached out to the United States allies like Tokyo and Hanoi's agreement to enter into an extensive strategic partnership. The security dilemma between China and Vietnam is more like a Type 2 dynamic, in which the countries seek changes to the status quo, fighting over material and territorial interest.
Is the situation getting any better these years?
The situation, the situation now isn't better at all. You see, although both sides have started to enhance diplomatic relations and promote cooperation, they are still at odds over the sovereignty of the South China Sea. In 2017, China reportedly threatened to attack the outposts of Vietnam in the Spratlys if Hanoi didn't stop its drilling at an oil and gas near Vanguard Bank. What's worse, in 2019, there was a showdown near the same area that lasted for 4 months until Hanoi withdraw a drilling rig. Thus, Vietnam's 2019 Defense White Paper stated that, depending on the circumstances and specific conditions, Vietnam will consider developing necessary, appropriate defense and military relations with other countries. It is certain that Vietnam will continue on strengthening its ties with other countries. For instance, in November 2021, Tokyo and Hanoi agreed to accelerate consultation for the transfer of specific equipment, including naval vessels and related equipment. Moreover, since most of the weapons of Vietnam are acquired from Russia, Vietnam is trying to get away from its dependence on Russian weapons. The Vietnam People's Air Force and the United States Air Force relationship in the 2020s is the keystone to help Vietnam to be less dependent on Russian weapons by purchasing US T-6 aircraft for air defense training.
Wow, that sounds really promising.
Yeah, but it is hard for Vietnam to please both sides at the same time. Unfortunately, Vietnam is caught between the US and Russia on the Ukrainian issue. Since most of the weapons in Vietnam are purchased from Russia, so if they oppose Russian decision to attack Ukraine, their situation in the South China Sea will be very dangerous. Thus, the Vietnam decision to vote for Russia in the UN Council may maintain their long friendly relationship with Russia. However, this decision may lead to sanctions against Vietnam too. Vietnam is now walking on fire trying to please both sides simultaneously. So, my conclusion is that these incidents prove that the South China Sea issue is still combustible and in need of a way to manage their disagreements peacefully. In my opinion, the best way to solve this problem is to find a neutral tribunal. Oh, sorry, it's tribunal like ICJ. You know what ICJ is? It stands for International Court for Justice to help them sort out the issue. By doing so, they can rule out the vague sovereignty claims and find a way that can satisfy both. However, this solution depends on the countries as well. Whether China or Vietnam is willing to give the power to others to divide their territory still remains a question to me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. So, Charlie just mentioned that last year Vietnam and Japan had made an agreement on transferring military equipment. In these years, Japan has kept showing concern about the military actions on the East China Sea area. Maggie, would you like to share about Japan's position on dealing with the security dilemma? Like, what actions and decisions did the Japanese government make?
Yeah, first, I think before we start getting into it, I think it's important for us to know a little about the history first, because the history it's an essential component of Japan's strategy toward China. Japan owes both its positive and negative legacy to its long-standing ties with China. Throughout history, Japan has been influenced by Chinese civilization, importing a system of writing, a structure of government, and ways to prepare food. Separated by the sea, Japan was able to maintain political independence from powerful Chinese dynasties throughout the centuries. Japan had created a modern nation-state by the late 19th century, while China became subject to colonization by European imperial powers. The United States has played a unique role in both Japan and Chinese history. It happened during April 2015. Japan had growing concerns about China and Russia's that they have increased the number of joint military drills in a way that is sparking concern in Tokyo, the capital city of Japan. One such joint exercise involved aircraft identification and air defense, with consideration given to how a crisis situation involving the Chinese Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ for short, over the East China Sea might play out. Japanese concerns about Chinese behavior in the East China Sea is not just based on conjectures about China's opaque intentions, but there are tangible and direct Chinese actions that Japan finds alarming, not only their opaque intentions. So on April 15, the Ministry of Defense reported that Japanese Air Self-Defense Force, or ASDF for short, the fighters were scrambled 943 times, close to a record in fiscal year 2014. That's one. That's 133 more times than fiscal year 2013, and only second to fiscal year 1984 during this Cold War, when ASDF fighters scrambled around 944 times. So the bulk of the increase was due to increased Russian activity. In fiscal year 2013, Japan scrambled against Russian aircraft 359 times, compared to 473 times in fiscal year 2014. The increase in Russian flights near Japan is most likely due to a suspected Russian program to expand its military pilot training. There was also concentrated spike in April of last year, so 2014, following North Korea's missile launch in late March and the joint U.S. and South Korea military exercises that were conducted around at the same time. So by comparison, Japan scrambled jets against Chinese aircraft about 415 times in fiscal 2013 and 464 times in fiscal 2014. So China is increasing its military flights between the East China Sea and the Pacific using the airspace between the islands of Okinawa Prefecture. The ministry reported that none of the Chinese aircraft, they were mainly fighter jets, approaching the disputed Senkaku or the Diaoyu Islands in the East China Sea that has violated Japanese airspace. So Japan's defense reforms are largely motivated by a need to respond to an uncertain security environment due to increased tensions around the Senkaku or the Diaoyu Islands. For example, the ministry plans to establish an amphibious unit by the end of fiscal 2018. In a step toward this goal, the third round of landing exercises conducted jointly by the Ground and Maritime Self-Defense Forces, or GSDF and MSDF respectively, were held over 6 days starting on April 11th. The two previous exercises were conducted in May and October 2014. And the official Japanese government position is that the training exercises are not directed against any country, but meant to improve Japan's very own capabilities to defend Japan's outlying islands overall. Although the Japanese public remains wedded to the idea of a pacifist Japan that is not a military power, hard facts on the ground may convince them of the necessity of the kinds of reform that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has been pushing since his re-election. However, persuading the public will require a high level of transparency and robust, open, and honest dialogue. And even though the Japanese government does deserve high marks for transparency with its annual Ministry of Defense white papers and the East Asian Strategic Review, the recently enacted state secrecy law has the potential to put a serious dent in this kind of regional confidence building. Furthermore, the Shinzo Abe's government's low tolerance for dissenting opinions, for example, the LDP's questioning of news shows, is counterproductive, since the Abe government does have logical reasons for its security reforms. It should be more proactive in engaging its own public, thereby helping in order not to raise more concerns in the region. So in international politics, the packaging of a policy change, which includes the public, domestic discourse over the new policy is often just as important as the substance of the change itself.
Maggie, thank you so much for telling us about it. And I think we're gonna have to stop here today. Again, I want to thank Eric, Mao, Charlie, and Maggie for participating in today's show and also providing me and the audience the information about the security dilemma issue.
Thank you for having us on the show.
Yeah,
No,
it's really fun being here.
no problem. Remember to invite
Yes,
me again next time.
Thank you.
Yeah,
sure. So, if you're interested in this kind of topic, make sure to tune in our next podcast, which will be available on every platform. Thank you for listening, and we wish you a good day. Thank you.